Hey, so what is going on, everybody? I'm back with another YouTube video. Now, today's video, guys, we are going to be doing a video that I've been planning to do for quite some time, and now that I got the right equipment, I felt it was time to do this. We are going to be doing a DBD killer tier list, but first, I do have a few announcements to make. Alright, so obviously, future plan videos are the stream compilation. It's one of those videos that I've been pushing aside for a while, so I'm gonna get to work on it as soon as I can. It's gonna take a lot. It's a lot to take in. And I guess I just don't really know where to begin. Every time I do another stream, obviously new funny moments pop up, so it's pretty difficult. And another announcement I have to make is that make sure you join the Discord. The link will always be in the description, and read the community posts so that you can stay up to date for content. News outside of YouTube, I guess. I did get my new microphone, so that is why I'm doing this video. And I hope you guys will enjoy it. It is a Blue Ice Snowball microphone. I'm not going to lean into the microphone this whole tier list, so you might not get the full, like, I guess you won't feel the full, how do you want to say it? The full potential behind the microphone this video, because it's gonna, I don't really want to lean into it this entire video or hold it really, really close to me. So I hope this is a good distance away, and I hope you guys will enjoy this video. So let's get started. So, before we go talk about our first killer, the kind of, the way I'm going to do this killer tier list is going to be based on how the average amount of people who play this killer, you know, what is their outcome of their matches? How well can they play despite how much skill they have in the game? I've seen other people who are like, well, if you're going up against top tier survivors, how well can this killer do against these survivors? I don't really like that idea. You know, tournaments are the fewest amount of games played in this game. In fact, many of the games played in this game are not against very good skilled players. Many of them are for players who are just starting out and still learning their skills, or people who have been playing the game for a while, but despite that, they're still learning. They have not perfected the whole game yet, or stuff like that. So this isn't going to be based off of top tier. I don't really like people who do that. This is just going to be based off of the average amount. So you're adding up how much, you know, all the matches that happen and dividing them all. So kind of like the mean of you know, how well the killer plays, taking all of the matches into consideration and finding out that exact average, how well each killer plays. That's what I'm going to be basing it off of. And, you know, I'm not going to divide it into categories like someone like Otofu did, where it's like mobility, utility, stuff like that. I'm just going to kind of talk about him, his strengths, his weaknesses, and where I think he goes. It's not going to be super complex or anything like that. And I'll try to go as quick as I can, but there's no guarantee that I won't blabble for a lot. So, obviously, our first killer is the Trapper. So let's go over, you know, how well Trapper can play in the majority of his matches. So obviously, Trapper's early game is pretty sucky. He, you know, this guy is in desperate need of a good buff, especially with, you know, he has to go around the map to pick up traps, and even with good add-ons, he's still gonna have a pretty tough game, even with, like, even top-tier add-ons. And this is just based off of, like, regular add-ons, but even, like, purple add-ons doesn't really make the most significant difference in his gameplay. It's not like he's gonna go from D tier to A tier if he puts on these purple add-ons that are just relief. You know, he is add-on dependent, but those add-ons are not guaranteed to significantly benefit his gameplay. Even like something like Eerie Stone, which can make a pretty big difference, don't get me wrong. But just average add-ons and an average Trapper is going to have a tough time regardless. And even decent survivors playing up against Trapper know how to, you know, counterplay his power. It's pretty easy. If you're just environmentally aware in your match and you're paying attention, you're gonna stumble upon traps, you're gonna disarm them, and it's only going to penalize the killer even more because he's gonna have to reset those traps at some point. If you had Eerie Stone, that'd make a difference, but we're just basing this off of regular add-ons. But the Trapper's still gonna have to waste time, so time management is something that Trapper really struggles with. So he's very perk dependent, add-on dependent, map dependent as well. He struggles a whole lot if he's on an indoor map because his traps are just like so extremely obvious. They're just right out in the open. So people who pay attention even a little bit will know how to get past his power pretty easily, even on maps with grass. And now that they're reworking all the maps, Trapper's having even a more tougher time because the grass is even easier to see. It's more further apart. So yeah, he has a tough early game with having to set up traps. His power is pretty easy to counterplay. So all in all, this killer is just really based off of luck in terms of his whole gameplay. Your power is never guaranteed to give you very much success. Only really the top tier Trapper players who really know what they're doing. And I'm not talking about Trappers who just basically know how to put a trap by a window or stuff like that, because you've all seen those beginner Trappers that don't really know what they're doing. They kind of place traps in random places or in front of generators and stuff like that. And then there's like kind of the middle Trappers like where I am, where we know where to put traps in pretty good places, but we don't really know how to use those traps effectively to snowball. Top tier Trappers know how to control one area, and sometimes that's really hard with Trapper because once again you have to really time invest, and there's no guarantee that even if you put in so much time, you manage to get really lucky and snowball the survivors and kill them all and stuff like that. I may be over exaggerating how absolutely terrible it is to play Trapper sometimes, because there are definitely games where you succeed, but it is definitely not a guarantee. His traps are just very much luck based, and his mobility, I should mention, his mobility is just, he has literally just a regular killer. There's nothing else besides his traps that can help him. He's just, to me, he's just pure luck. Sometimes it can help you in chase a little bit, but like I said, people who are paying attention will be able to avoid those traps, and even less skilled players, you won't really get to use your power a whole lot. That's another thing I should mention. Trapper is one of those killers where your power, unless you're really good and you're really trying to incorporate into your gameplay, you're trying to control a zone, it's going to be very difficult to try to get your power to work very effectively to actually end up improving your gameplay. Like, you may get one or two people trapped in one game, but what did that really do to help affect your game? Even if you won the game, what did your power really do for you? And compare that to games where you failed. So Trapper, he struggles quite a bit. His power is just based off of luck, really, in the long run. And it's not very hard to counter. So Trapper, he has to go in D tier. I mean, he's very much in need of a good buff that can help improve his traps to be less luck dependent. Add in some certain add-ons to base kit and stuff like that. I think that's what he really needs. So that's it for Trapper. Now let's talk about Wraith. Wraith, who just recently received a pretty good buff. They weren't even meaning to directly buff Wraith in this patch. It was the mid-chapter patch. But just like before the buff, all he really needed was a movement speed buff and a few other tweaks, and that did just good for him. Wraith definitely feels a lot more lively now, a lot better to play than he initially did. He isn't add-on dependent by any means now. You can run really fun add-ons and stuff like that, but you can run no add-ons now, and you're pretty much good to go. No, that being said, I don't think you really need, I don't think you would go off just running no add-ons every game you play with Wraith, but the point I'm trying to make is that he used to be really dependent on things like Windstorm. Now he really isn't. So the majority of the other add-ons will help him a little bit, but were just not as important as Windstorm initially was. Now Windstorm's base kit, so he definitely feels a lot better, and yeah, so let's talk about Wraith. So his mobility now, like I said, with the movement speed buff, is just really, really good. He still struggles in chase a lot. Mediocre survivors even will know how to get past his power. And unskilled survivors, they, you know, even despite that whole surprise element that he has, it's not really going to be a big snowball even against, like, lower tier survivors and stuff like that. So I'm saying across the board, he's nothing super, super special. He's definitely a lot better than he used to be. Like I said, his mobility is definitely a lot better. His chase is okay. They kind of nerfed his chase a bit with the slight decrease in movement speed after he comes out. The nice thing about Wraith that I will say, though, that is really good and that puts him definitely above Trapper, is that it's really easy to get that first initial hit with Wraith because, you know, even throughout the match when they know it's a Wraith, right? You're still, even top tier survivors will not really be able to avoid this or counter this, but his surprise factor is something that he loses it a bit throughout his game because after they know that it's a Wraith, they're definitely going to be paying attention a lot more. But it still gets you that, it almost guarantees you to get a first initial hit if you're, like, approaching somebody by a gen, or you're coming from behind somebody that you see out in the open, or something like that. Even good survivors, they'll still pay attention, but there's nothing they can really do to avoid you from getting that first initial hit with that speed boost. Unless they have perks like Spine Chill or stuff like that, obviously that can really, really counter it. But it's not really going to harm you a whole bunch. Only a few survivors will usually carry on these perks and stuff like that. So it's not going to just absolutely destroy Wraith's gameplay, but it can make some kind of impact. I guess I shouldn't say that it's not going to do anything, but it is going to make some kind of impact. And I wish I could talk about Wraith's chase potential a bit more and some of his utility that he has. But this is going off of kind of like the average Wraith player. I guess I should say that most Wraith players know how to body block at pallets or at windows, so that can be pretty effective with chase. I even see good survivors, like you block them at a window, and they're like, oh no, what do I do? And they stand there for a few seconds, and they finally realize what they're doing, and by that time you get that hit. So his chase is a little bit higher than most other killers, but it's not, that whole body blocking strategy isn't really going to come into play a whole lot. And there's also another flicking strategy that you could do to help bait jukes or dead hards and stuff like that. It doesn't really make a significant difference. I mean, basically any killer could bait a dead hard. He baits it a little bit better, and it helps with, like, better or good survivors, because not a lot of good survivors know about the flicking strategy where you kind of tap your bell and it'll make it look like he's gonna swing. So it helps him a little bit in terms of utility wise, but a lot of his utility that he has doesn't really come into play, like his whole flicking strategy and his body blocking strategy. It's kind of like Trapper's initial power. You might get it a few times per match, but it's not really going to make the hugest impact. The thing that gives him Wraith a significant impact is his mobility and his stealth throughout the game. Those are things that are going to constantly help you throughout the game. So if this was before the buff, Wraith would probably be in D tier, but Wraith is he's doing a lot better, and I think he deserves to be in C tier. I think he's underestimated, definitely, for sure. Sorry about that, guys. But I think he's definitely an underestimated killer, and across the board, Wraiths, like, they're not guaranteed. Shut up. Sorry about that, guys. They're not guaranteed going to have the easiest game ever throughout all their matches, but it's definitely a lot better than Trapper's games on average. So that's all that I have to say about Wraith. Now let's get on to Hillbilly. I think people and I'm going to say this right off the bat, I think people are really overestimating how badly Hillbilly got nerfed. Personally, I mean, I guess I don't know how absolutely insane Hillbilly was before the nerf. I like I said, I did play before the nerf. I did. I played a good amount of time before the nerf. I played about 6 to 7 months before the nerf actually happened. I just don't think I really used the insane add-ons all the time because I wasn't really a huge Hillbilly player. I know there was a lot of Hillbilly mains that got hit hard by the nerf, but I honestly think that people are really overestimating Hillbilly's gameplay now after the nerf. People are like, man, they shouldn't have nerfed his base kit with this overheat mechanic. To me, I play the game, and even I use and abuse the chainsaw ability a whole lot, and I might only get an overheat once every 2 to 3 games. It really does not affect me, and I don't know why people are complaining. People aren't complaining about the add-on stuff. They're complaining about the overheat mechanic, and I'm just really annoyed by that. I think his add-ons, despite maybe like the charge time add-ons and stuff like that, are actually a lot better now. His low pro chains is definitely a lot more useful. His iridescent add-ons are pretty useful and stuff like that. So his add-ons are actually pretty decent, except for, you know, they obviously removed the charge time add-ons and stuff like that. That's totally understandable. But his add-ons definitely still feel really, really good to me and very, very useful and stuff like that. And I don't personally... Shut up! I'm gonna have to turn this alarm off. Jesus Christ. But, I think his add-ons are still pretty effective, and I just think people honestly overestimate, you know, the nerf and how badly it affected him. Obviously, now, I will admit to this, there are a lot less Hillbilly players in the game now. I have noticed that. I go against very, very few Hillbillies since the nerf, and it's kind of sad because Hillbilly's probably one of the most fun killers to play up against. If we were doing this on, you know, how fun killers were to play against, Billy'd be an S tier automatically because Hillbilly's just really, really fun to play against. But this is obviously about skill. So his mobility is pretty insane still. He can fly across the map in a matter of seconds, and if Tinkerer procs, you're over there, and if you're lucky, you might be able to snipe somebody from across the map. His chase is pretty good. He still has counterplay. Even, you know, very, very average survivors, people in the middle, and I'm even talking about red rank survivors, because red rank survivors, not all of them are absolutely top tier, know how to counterplay Hillbilly's power pretty good. You know how to juke pretty well. There's going to be a couple times where you're going to be able to avoid his chainsaw down, and the Hillbilly's eventually going to get annoyed after a whole bunch of those, and he's going to have to end up M1ing you. So that's an unfortunate thing about Hillbilly sometimes, is sometimes he has a tough time in chase if you have that one good survivor on that team who knows how to run you really well. But for the most part, it's not that hard to get that initial chainsaw down. A lot of survivors will make that one little blunt, and that causes you to get that insta down. And yeah, I just really think that Hillbilly has been really over-exaggerated for how bad his nerf is. I think he still plays really, really well. For the most part, when I play my Hillbilly matches, I even have some good survivors, and I still have a pretty good time in chase. You know, it's not absolutely the worst experience of my life, you know, and stuff like that. So I think Hillbilly, he's definitely not S tier, and he's never really been an S tier, but I think he still remains in A tier, even after the nerf. I think really people overestimate how bad he plays in chase because of the overheat mechanic and whatnot. His mobility is good, his chase is good, and that's all that really, really matters for Hillbilly. So, yeah, that's all there is to say about him. Alright, so next we got Nurse. Now, I used to be all very, very blunt about Nurse and stuff like that when I played on console for the first time. I still don't play on PC because I'm waiting for cross progression between console and PC. But I used to be like, man, this is about console, okay? Nurse sucks. F tier. But I will base this off of PC, not console, because I feel like console is just denying her overall ability. And Nurse. the average amount of nurses have a pretty high success rate, obviously. And I think even really, really good nurses versus like, okay, I know how to play nurse and I know how to play her pretty effectively, but I'm not absolutely insane with her. I don't know every skill with them. I think they pretty much both have kind of the same outcome of matches overall. The average amount of nurses and a really, really top tier nurse, I think they both can win a whole lot of matches just by being able to play nurse in general, knowing how to use her. Now, once in a while, you'll get a really, really bad nurse that has no idea what she's doing. She's having a very, very difficult time trying to land blinks. But that isn't every single nurse. And I don't want to put nurse in, the B tier because I'm basing this off of the average amount of nurses and stuff like that. I feel like that would be completely denying the nurse's potential on this tier list and stuff like that. I think even average nurses still have a pretty good time in the matches. Now, one thing that I think a lot of people forget about with nurses, they always deny the counterplay that comes with playing nurse. And you'll see that when I talk about spirit. It's going to get a bit more controversial. But being able... What makes a killer... What can affect a killer to be good, and especially in terms of my tier list with the average amount of players, what can affect a killer to be really better is how easy it is to play that killer, because you're going to just repeatedly use the same action because its power is really, really easy to use. The thing about Nurse is that her power is not the easiest thing to use, and that's why a lot of beginner nurses really, really struggle. Now, this isn't really going to come into play until I start talking about Spirit, and that's when I'll explain why, well, you'll see. But Nurse, even for being a more difficult killer to play, if you know the basic gist of what you're doing, and you're not like some of those rank 20 nurses that are having a really tough time, you're still going to have a pretty decent match. I don't play Nurse at all because she's on console, but I'm sure if I played on PC, the amount of times I play someone like Ghostface or something like that, I definitely have a much easier time with her. So, based off of the average amount of survivors, nurses pretty much always S tier across the board, unless you're considering this tier list off of rank 20 killers, then Nurse would be in D tier, because my god, she has a very, very tough time. But Nurse's chase is absolutely insane. Her mobility is pretty good. I wouldn't say it's the most incredible thing in the world. Once again, her mobility is something that kind of requires skill to get the absolute maximum potential and also the best add-ons. But if we're talking about base kit or even just regular add-ons, her mobility still works pretty well. She gets around the map definitely a lot faster than just a regular 4.4 or 4.6 killer. So yeah, Nurse goes into the S tier. So yeah. Let's get on to the next killer, which is going to be... Some people might get a little bit mad at me, especially PC players, but the next killer is going to be Hag, because I think it's a slightly different order for PC players, but on console, the order is a little bit different, so I apologize for that. I don't think it's going to be much of a big deal. Let's talk about Hag now. Hag. My god. Hag... to be honest, this is one of the more uncommon killers that I see, but that does not mean anything. Hag has just a wide range of snowball ability. Much comparable to Nurse in a way, but in different ways from Nurse, obviously. I mean, just when I see that the killer is a Hag, I know I'm gonna have a tough time, even if it's a beginner Hag. Like, the thing about Hag, and I guess I forgot about Hag when I was talking about Nurse with this, is that she is a very, very easy killer to learn. So even very, very, are not very skilled players or beginner killers who play Hag still have a very, very successful match, given the fact that her power is just pretty easy to use. And once you start learning, different tricks and stuff like that you can use with Hag, your games are going to be very, very epic with Hag. They're going to be very, very successful. So even the not top tier Hags will still have a pretty easy time going into the match. But if we're talking about kind of the average Hags, most of them know how to put, traps obviously in front of the hook, go away from the hook, bother another survivor, and then instantly jump on top of another 2 survivors, and that snowball is just really incredible. And the nice thing about Hag compared to someone like Trapper is that you don't really have to put all your traps in one area. You could have them spread out through the map, and I've never really had a problem with a trap being too far away. She's not add-on dependent in any way necessary, but her add-ons can definitely benefit in her gameplay. The only thing that really holds back Hag is just time management. And her time management isn't as bad as Trapper because you don't really have to worry about putting so much time into placing traps. You'll just kind of do it routinely throughout the match. Like you're chasing a survivor and they drop a pallet, you put a trap in front of the pallet. Or you're chasing a survivor, you happen to come across a strong window, you just quickly place down a trap. You don't really lose a lot of distance or whatever. You just kind of routinely do it throughout your game, and it doesn't make a significant impact in your game. And just, like I said, the average amount of Hag players have a pretty easy time because even her most powerful tools, like putting a trap in front of a hook and stuff like that, just significantly impact her gameplay and stuff like that. And her mobility is pretty good because you could trap up a gen and you're waiting for somebody to come back to it. You are not perk dependent because your power essentially, you don't need to know where someone is because your power will just get you to where they are when they're trying to do something like a hex totem or they're hopping back onto a gen that's really important. So obviously you trapped it, and she can make an impact in that. So she's not very perk dependent. She's not very add-on dependent. Her mobility is pretty good because she can get into important areas of the map pretty easily. Like you trap a gen that's almost done, survivor comes back to it, you come there, and chances are you might have several survivors there. So Hag is a very good killer, and I have to put her in S tier. Some people would put her in the A tier, but that would be underestimating Hag's potential. People are always like, Hag does have quite a bit of counterplay, good survivors. The only amount of counterplay that I can really see with Hag is players who try to get up in her face or annoy her traps or, constantly trigger her traps or whatever. But even then, let's say a survivor walks up to a trap and then they sprint away really quickly, like that strategy. I still don't really have a tough time getting the hit, initial hit, anyways. So the counterplay doesn't really make a huge detriment to her gameplay. I think the counterplay is pretty similar to the amount of impact it can make on someone like Nurse. Like if you're a good juker, you have dead hard. It's pretty similar. So I won't deny that there is counterplay in Hag. Even not the best survivors know that if you constantly trigger those traps that she spent time putting into, it can impact her game. But despite that, I think she's still a pretty good killer, and I'm not going to let that place her down to the A tier or whatever. So enough talking about Hag. Let's get on to the next killer, which is Doctor. Now, when I first started playing the game, Doctor, I was very tied into him. I really loved playing Doctor, and if this was the case 10, 11 months ago, I would have put Doctor in the S tier because I was just an insane person. But for the most part, I think this is where the average amount of doctors, or the average amount of killers really kicks in, especially for Doctor. because top tier doctors know how to perfect the timing of shocks and to not let that counterplay that a lot of survivors know how to use against him. But for the most part, the average amount of doctors are not the best at timing their shocks correctly and getting past the counterplay that survivors attempt to do on you. And the average amount of survivors are going to easily be able to counterplay you. I mean, just dropping pallets early. And that's realistically a counterplay against any killer. But obviously, is it going to be very efficient? Or, you know, the best strategy? No, it's not. But against Doctor, it's a lot better. So yeah, one of the biggest counterplays is obviously dropping the pallet early. And against on really long loops, you're gonna have a tough time using your shock ability to be able to shut down that chase. So his chase is not the absolute top tier, but on most of the loops, it's going to be pretty effective. But the average amount of survivors are going to be able to see the good loops and know your weaknesses and take advantage of that. They're going to go on those good loops. They're going to occasionally drop those pallets early if they need to, and they're going to counter that power. But on other loops, it can still help you pretty easily in where someone maybe like Huntress would struggle with, or Trickster would struggle with, especially those 4.4 killers. Like if you're playing on one of those loops like with a rock or something like that, that's something he succeeds in very well. Or even the Killer Shack, he does pretty decent with. He doesn't shut down the Killer Shack completely, but he still does pretty well. And his add-ons, and just putting on very, very basic perks on this killer, can also do pretty good for him. You do not need, by any means, top-tier perks or add-ons on this killer. You can run, Brown Order, Brown Discipline, or Brown Calm, and stuff like that. What are the Brown add-ons are? And you're still gonna have a pretty good game. You do not, by any means, need top-tier add-ons. You could run a very, very basic range add-on, or, another add-on like Calm or Discipline or something like that. And those add-ons do really, really help. And they don't need to be top tier by any means. The nice thing about Doctor is not only his chase, but he's just a very, very disruptive killer, in the sense that survivors are always really desperate to get gens done or get an action done, and this killer, it just feels like he's always affecting you in some way. You could just be doing a gen, and while you're doing that, the Doctor is simultaneously chasing a survivor. His static blast procs, so he uses his static blast, and now you're interfered as well with the survivor that he's chasing. So he can maintain a lot of survivors at once, and he can make objectives, a little bit harder to do, and, kind of distract you from what you're doing, from having to do something else. So the Doctor, I don't think he's A tier, but he's definitely B tier. Across the board, Doctor, the average Doctor does have a pretty good match. They're not, absolute top tier, snowball, and all that, but the average Doctor can have a pretty good chase. They can have, they can slow down the gens pretty good. Everything is just kind of in the middle for Doctor. If this was absolute top tier Doctors, their chase would definitely be a lot more up there. They would definitely be able to slow down the game a lot more, and stuff like that. But because this killer is not very perk dependent, not very add-on dependent, has a pretty good chase just overall, just kind of base kit Doctor in general, just still plays pretty well. So, and because his power is so complex, I mean, it really, really helps with not needing a whole bunch of top tier perks and add-ons and stuff like that. So he's definitely B tier. I'm not going to say that he's an A tier. He's just a very, very average, all-around, pretty successful killer. So let's go on to the next killer, which is, I believe, Huntress. Like I said, at this point on, the order is definitely messed up between PC and console, but I don't think it's really, really going to matter that much. Alright, Huntress. This is kind of a similar situation with Doctor. If you would have asked me when I started the game how good Huntress was, I probably would have put her in the B or C tier. I was always like, why are people overestimating the potential of Huntress and stuff like that? I'm like, why are people, saying this and that about Huntress? She's not even that good or whatever. The truth is that even non-Huntress mains, and if you're good at Huntress, most of the time you're a Huntress main, but even decent Huntresses who know basic tricks that they can use throughout their gameplay will have a pretty good match. It's the similar situation with Doctor. You don't have to be perfect at timing. You don't have to be perfect at getting your shots. You just have to know the basic amount of tricks to have a successful match, and that is the same situation with Huntress. If you know how to wind up a hatchet before a pallet and drop and throw your hatchet, or you know how to wind up a hatchet before someone vaults a window and get them. Basically for Huntress, it's knowing how to wind up a hatchet while someone's in locked animation so that you can get that hit. A lot of Huntresses know how to do that, and they don't have to be top tier. A lot of Huntresses, even unskilled Huntresses, or Huntresses that aren't able to get a snipe across the map or whatever, know how to use that pretty effectively. And I think Huntress is pretty comparable to Doctor and Nurse in a way, where, yes, you do have, like, rank 20 nurses and Huntresses that struggle really well, or struggle a lot with their power and whatnot. But across the board, many Huntresses know what they're doing, and they can use their power very, very frequently, and it can make an impact on their game. That is something that Huntress definitely has an advantage of over a lot of killers, is you are going to be using her power constantly to make an impact on your game. Someone like Trapper, though, is not really going to use his power a lot because it's really just dependent upon luck. So her chase is pretty good. If you, like I said, just if you know what you're doing, if you know the basic amount of the basic tricks behind Huntress, winding your hatchets when someone is in locked animation, you're gonna have a pretty decent chase. Mobility-wise, she struggles a bit, but that's when you put on pretty good perks. You don't need absolute top tier perks, but you put on a decent set of perks, decent add-ons, and you're still gonna have a really good match. Not a lot is gonna hold you back. So Huntress is definitely A tier. If you would have asked me, months and months ago, I probably would have put her in the B tier or something like that. I don't think she's above Hillbilly, because Hillbilly has that advantage with the mobility, and still has a really good chase, whereas Huntress doesn't really have the mobility. But Huntress, overall, plays pretty well across the board, and enough said there. Alright, now, let's talk about Myers. Now, Myers, this is another killer, where if you would have asked me months and months ago, I would have put Myers in the A or S tier. Myers, though, has a similar disadvantage to someone like Trapper. His early game, he really struggles. You want to get out of tier 1 as fast as you can. And the average amount of survivors know how to, counter you trying to get out of that stock. They're going to try to avoid you as much as possible, get out of your line of sight, so that you're going to have a tough time getting to tier 1 or tier 3. Now, I'm not going to say that it's super hard to get out of tier 1. I feel like a lot of people overestimate that, because it's not that hard. I see a lot of survivors struggle to get out of his line of sight. They drop a pallet as if they're safe from the killer. Actually, dropping a pallet against a Myers is gonna give him a ton of juice, because you have that locked animation, and then you have all that time trying to run away from that pallet and trying to get out of line of sight. So there are definitely key moments where you can get a ton of juice into your tier to help you get out of tier 1 or into tier 3. So what was I gonna say? So I think it's kind of overestimated how badly his early game is. It definitely makes some kind of impact on his gameplay, but for the most part, it's it's not something like with Trapper where he has to go around the map just to get his power in the first place. And getting tier 3 is not that hard either. Like I said, there's really no way that survivors can just all the time avoid you from getting into their line of sight and tearing up. And with good perks and good add-ons, you can get to out of tier 1 or into tier 3 a lot faster, and you can know where a lot of survivors are so that you can get to tier 3 or out of tier 1 so that you can start snowballing and whatnot. Once he's in tier 3 though, it really just comes down to being able to capitalize on his power. This is something that I'll probably talk about with Oni or any killer that has like a certain amount of time where they are destined to snowball a lot. But Myers, when you get into tier 3, it's really dependent on if you can capitalize on that power enough so that you can make a significant impact on the game. Unlike Oni, your power doesn't stop after you pick up somebody and you hook them. So you can easily down somebody, and oh my god, his chase with tier 3 is very, very, very nice, and it feels really, really good. His chase, for the most part, is not bad. Sometimes it's a regular chase, and sometimes he has a very, very easy chase. So he definitely has a higher chase than normal compared to other killers. So he doesn't really struggle in chase. The only thing that really holds him back is like the mobility and whatnot. But like with Huntress, it's not the worst thing because you have other things that kind of make up for that or redeem that. So yeah. When you get into tier 3, the nice thing is if you have decent add-ons that extend tier 3, like even just a green add-on like the green bow tie, you're going to have a pretty long tier 3, and you're going to be able to down multiple survivors with your insta-down, and get you those hooks a lot easier and a lot faster. So, Myers is not absolutely top tier, because I think his weaknesses and his strengths really just kind of balance out, and he definitely does have some counterplay to him, in a sense, but this is based on the average amount of survivors. Their counterplay is not the absolute best against a Myers. If this was top tier survivors though, they definitely know how to counter Myers and how to avoid him from getting his power, much like someone like Oni. But against the average amount of survivors, and an average Myers who knows what he's doing is going to have a pretty successful map. His power isn't the absolute most complex thing to it. I struggled when I first started playing Myers because I had no idea what the whole stock ability was. I was like completely confused, and I was like, dude, I freaking love Myers so much, but in this game they had to screw over his power until I realized what his power actually does, and I was like, oh wow, so Myers is better than I expected. So Myers, it's really debatable whether or not he's in C or B tier, but because a lot of people overestimate how bad some of his early game is and stuff like that, and they probably end up putting him in C tier, because of that difference, that disparity, I'm probably going to put him in the B tier. I could be wrong on this, but I think that's an okay spot for him in the B tier. So, who is the next killer after Myers? Oh yes, we do have Bubba. Now Bubba, after his buff, Bubba definitely feels a lot better. If you would have asked me before the buff, he would have been in B tier. Now Bubba feels a lot better. And even the nice thing, this is one thing I definitely have to mention with Bubba. The thing about Bubba, that much like Huntress, he has one of those things that's different from all the other killers and kind of a slight advantage, especially in the way that I am ruling this out, is that even really, really bad players, I mean really terrible first match players, don't struggle with Bubba because they can use the simplest strategies to successfully get that insta down and get those hooks that you need faster, and you can get more of them by simply just face camping a hook or standing by multiple survivors, revving up your chainsaw and downing them all. I mean, it is extremely simple to learn how to use his power effectively. That's definitely an advantage that Bubba has. And, obviously this is about the average amount of killers. So those killers that are not the absolute top tier but are mediocre can play even better because they know how to use his power even better in chase and not just like face camping a hook or whatever. So his chase is pretty good, and another advantage that Bubba has is he's probably one of the greatest killers for getting rid of pallets really quickly. I mean, if you get an average survivor that you come across in a Bubba game will waste a ton of pallets against a Bubba. And if the survivors are not capitalizing on on those gems, which they don't always do, you're going to shred a whole bunch of pallets down while everybody else is sticking around doing side objectives that they don't need to do and stuff like that. So there is counterplay to Bubba with some of the better survivors, but for the most part, a lot of people don't capitalize on that counterplay that can go against Bubba when they're wasting so much time in chase with him. It's a similar thing with Doctor, where people are trying to waste time in chase or kill time in chase by just early dropping pallets and stuff like that. Not all the time do the other survivors capitalize on that by just sitting on gens that entire time. And why do they need to worry about the amount of pallets? Because they're just going to be getting gens done at the time. But not all the time are they capitalizing on that. And even then, you're not wasting a whole bunch of time shredding 2 or 3 pallets, because after those, usually then you'll eventually get the down after 1 or 2 pallets. And then you get into another chase, you waste 1 or 2 pallets, and so on and so forth. So Bubba is very good in chase. He has a bit of a utility with being able to shred those pallets down pretty quickly. And his mobility, this is something that I forgot to mention, but I guess not a lot of Bubbas really use his power for mobility. Sometimes his power can be used for mobility, but I just figured I'd mention that because I think that's something that people really need to learn with Bubba to make him a little bit better, is with decent add-ons and decent perks. Well, I guess I should say add-ons with charge add-ons and stuff like that, and you get a really long chainsaw sprint, and those charges replenish fairly quickly, and even if you don't have a lot of charges, you can still get the down with a few charges, which is the nice thing about Bubba. He's not really add-on dependent, much like Blight. In a sense, his power recharges pretty quickly. Same thing with Nurse. I mean, there's a lot of killers you can compare it to, but the thing I'm trying to say is that put on a few good add-ons, put on a few good perks, and you're almost always gonna have a pretty successful match with Bubba. So Bubba, where do I put him? I think I'm gonna put him in A. He is definitely a lot better than he was. How many months ago is it now? 10 months ago, maybe. I don't know, 8 months ago, something like that. But since then, he was in D tier. Now he's all the way up in A, in my opinion. So yeah, Bubba, A tier. Enough said. All right, who is the next killer after Bubba? I have to think here. I believe it is Freddy, right? I think it's Freddy. Okay. Freddy. Alright. Now this would be a different story if we were talking about... I want to see the runtime on this real quick. Holy crap, we've almost been going for an hour, but we have gotten a lot of killers done, so... Anyways. Now if we were talking about going up against top tier survivors, Freddy would probably not be as good as he was. Now let's assume this is after the nerf that they're going to add to Freddy, obviously. There's going to be an upcoming nerf in a few weeks for Freddy, so I don't want to just say before the nerf and be like, haha, I can put him up in A tier now, or whatever. But Freddy, a majority of survivors, I think the reason why they have a tough time playing up against Freddy is because they don't really know how to counterplay him, and also because there's just so many things that Freddy has going for him that interfere with the survivors directly. Like, when they're asleep, they have to try to stop wasting time, like with Jen's slowdown, so they have to waste even more time by going to a clock to wake them up, and they'll only temporarily be woken up. And you don't even have to have absolute top-tier slowdown add-ons for this. Now, obviously, this is after the nerf, so there isn't really after the nerf. I can't remember exactly all the add-ons, but I don't think there's any Gen slowdown add-ons. There might be a few in there. But if this was before the nerf, I mean, he could just have decent slowdown even with, like, very, very basic add-ons. But with good perks, even after the nerf and with good add-ons, I think Freddy can still play pretty well, but he doesn't have as much utility as he initially did with like slowdown and stuff like that. His mobility is obviously still going to be there because he's going to be able to teleport to generators. His chase is going to be decent. Again, with the little snare nerf or whatever, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, but I don't think it's going to be a huge impact on his gameplay. I could be wrong, but overall, I think Freddy, enough said there. After the nerf, I think he's still going to be, I think he's still going to be A tier. I could be wrong, and I probably will anticipate changing this in the future or something like that. But I think he'll still be an A tier, because there's certain things that people will still not know how to counter Freddy against. His snares are fairly easy to counter. When I use my snares, I don't see a whole lot of survivors who try to avoid them a whole bunch. Sometimes you'll periodically or routinely place snares around, and then a survivor will come around and get rid of it, which really isn't a big counterplay to Freddy, because all you really do is just sit there and you keep tapping down snares or whatever. So yeah, I think, I'm gonna move him down to the B tier, and just kind of in between. So I should probably organize this a bit. So Hillbilly definitely above Huntress, Bubba probably above Huntress. So Hillbilly and Bubba above Huntress. I think Freddy above Doctor above Myers, and yeah, I think this seems good so far. So yeah, we'll leave it there. But I think he'll be in probably the top of the B tier. I don't think he'll be in A tier because, then again, they're removing that slowdown that he initially had, which was something really great for his utility, and they're removing his chase. They're kind of cutting down his chase a little bit, so it's going to be a bit more difficult. Alright, next killer, I believe, is Pig. Pig is, I think, another underestimated killer, honestly. Pig has a fairly decent chase. Now, mobility, I don't really need to say a lot about mobility. Obviously, just a regular 4.6 killer. Doesn't really hold her back a whole lot. So enough said with mobility. But this is about chase, and this is about utility, mainly. Her chase is decent. A majority of survivors know how to counter her whole dash attack thing. Even if you're a really, really good Pig and you know how to, turn really quickly so that you can fake and, get around a loop and get that hit with that dash attack, a lot of survivors know how to counter that pretty easily. So even absolute top tier Pigs still struggle with chase a little bit with all that they can really use. And because this is based off of the average amount of Pigs, not a lot of Pigs can get a whole bunch of grabs off of generators, but they can still get a first initial hit, kind of like how Wraith has. But his stealth power and his stealth ability and being able to get his first hit is not as good as Wraith's, because he literally gets slowed down a little bit by going into stealth, and yeah, it's just a little bit more difficult to get that initial first hit than it is with Wraith. Wraith, it feels like there's nothing holding you back if you do go into stealth mode to go up to a generator to get that initial hit. So his chase is decent. His utility with the whole stealth power is decent. It doesn't really make a huge impact. the biggest thing that I think a lot of people underestimate is his traps. His traps, I think people overestimate the like how bad the traps are. I think traps can actually make a pretty good impact on his game. If you are able to capitalize for, you know, just the average pig, if you're able to get a few downs fairly quickly, and the downs aren't super far apart, and you get multiple traps on people at a certain amount of time, that is going to distract survivors off of some of the main objectives, because they're going to want to try to well, it really just depends on the survivor, but either way, like, even if they get the trap off before they do the gen, it still gives you time to chase a survivor or regress those gens. And if they do it after, well, now they're in a bit of a dilemma because they have to get that trap off in enough time, and there's nothing that's really saying that they're guaranteed going to get that trap off in the first time. Now, it is definitely a kind of a luck-based thing, because I will say this, many times a survivor will get it off in the first 1 or 2 traps. But it can definitely be a pretty good slowdown in the pig's game. And it's not very uncommon that you get a kill with a bear trap. If you get lucky with the map, like, just not a whole bunch of the maps are really small. So if you get a decent sized map, like, let's say you get like a cold one map, and you run decent add-ons, you don't even have to run top tier add-ons, you could get the potential to get a kill with that reverse bear trap if you know how to put in the time to pressure that survivor, because even not so good pigs know how to pressure the survivor with a reverse bear trap so that they can pause that timer, distract him away from that reverse bear trap, and then they have to go all the way back to it. So they can kind of manage a whole bunch of survivors at once and put pressure on a whole bunch of survivors at once just by having one survivor having that reverse bear trap on, being able to routinely go back to that survivor, if you're close to another person, you know, kind of distract them off of a reverse bear trap box, and then go back to chasing that other survivor. So pig is not B tier, but definitely C tier. I've been planning to put her in C tier even before I did this. I was thinking about you know, what tiers certain killers are going into, and one of them I was thinking about was pig. So I don't think pig is above Wraith, because Wraith is essentially a better pig in a way, especially with the stealth ability, and the chase is a little bit better. Not a lot of survivors know how to counter Wraith's chase, like with some of the things that he can use in chase. So pig is C, below Wraith, just slightly below Wraith, and yeah. So I'm back. I took a short break, actually played a match of DBD, but yeah, I just took a short break to do some other stuff, because I would have lost my mind if I would have kept going here. But okay, we got done with pig, so I believe our next killer is Clown. So Clown, after his buff, he doesn't feel too much different, in a sense, and his buff really only affects clowns who really know how to use their yellow bottles effectively. The only other thing that really improved for him was, I guess, his add-ons improved slightly. Some of his add-ons weren't very useful, and they gave life to some of those add-ons that weren't very useful, and made the add-ons that were already pretty good even better. So the Clown isn't too much better than he initially was before the buff. I shouldn't even call it buff. It was just like a slight improvement for things that we all knew that he needed improvements on, and I'm sure somebody could think up an idea, but as of right now, Clown, we'll just have to see how he does. I don't think he really has improved too much after the buff. But that being said, the Clown, in terms of chase and mobility wise, I think a lot of people are going to be really curious mobility wise. I don't think his mobility is that good. With the yellow bottles, I don't really suggest that people use them for mobility. And I think over time, people will start to understand how you really want to use the yellow bottles. And the way you want to use the yellow bottles is in a similar way to what Otsdarva is using them for, and that's for making your chase even better than it initially was, because your chase wasn't the best with just the purple bottles. It's still pretty good. It's not bad. It's definitely better than average. But with the yellow bottles, if you know how to use the yellow bottles in combination with the purple, your chases are going to be insane with Clown. But unfortunately, a lot of the Clown player base does not know how to use his power to the fullest potential, and they end up wasting all their bottles on trying to get around the map, quote unquote, quicker. And I still do this too. I've tried the strategy where you combine them together, but I need to look more into that, because honestly, I'm not too great at that. I definitely need to look into how to do that. So I would hope that Otsdarva at some point does like a Clown's tips and tricks on how to use the yellow and purple bottles in combination, instead of wasting a lot of your bottles for mobility. The mobility is okay. The only time where I really find it pretty useful is when you're in a linear area and you can throw it really far ahead of you so that you can get that boost of speed, or you throw it a little bit ahead of you, someone's working on a generator, you're aware that someone's working on a generator and you need to get it to it quick, and by the time you're near the generator, you're approaching that survivor faster than you normally would. So that's a time where it can help, and it does happen very often. I just got done playing a Clown game, and I'll tell you, it does happen pretty often, and it can help in a lot of ways. So his chase is pretty good. His mobility isn't the best, but he can get a little bit of a speed boost and many different actions. The problem is that you're wasting your own power, a lot of your own power, just to do that. So I think by doing this buff that they did, they definitely made Clown even more add-on dependent, because now he's dependent on needing more bottles. So I think a lot of the add-ons, one of the most dependent add-ons that Clown needs now is the increased amount of bottles add-on. So I think Clown, for a buff, I think he definitely needs at least a few extra bottles to accommodate for that. And he should be good. And then maybe tweak the whole yellow bottle situation. Maybe make it so that the survivors are never affected by the yellow bottles. Kind of as a... the survivors are only affected by the pink bottles, and you're affected by the yellow bottles. I think that would be a lot more fair for Clown. Obviously, it's not fair for the survivors, but it would make Clown feel better. And just get rid of the delay for the yellow bottles. The yellow bottles should be instant. They shouldn't, have that 3-second or 2.5-second wait before they turn yellow. I think that's really, really stupid. And I think he'll do just fine after that. And maybe increase the speed boost as well. And I think he would do pretty well. Assuming that happened, he'd probably be in B tier. But Clown right now, I'll talk about him more, I think is honestly in C tier. Before the buff, he was in D tier, but with the increased reload speed, it definitely helps a lot more. You run decent add-ons, especially the increased bottle add-ons, and you're gonna do okay. I don't really ever find a moment where I use a few yellow bottles and I'm like, oh shoot, I'm out of bottles. Because you only really need 1 or 2 bottles during a chase, and then you just reload really quickly. It's not going to be that big of a deal. So Clown is by no means a very, very good killer, but like I said, with those buffs that I suggest, I think he could definitely have a lot of potential. So yeah, Clown is C, below Pig, for sure. And enough said there. So next up is Spirit, and this is going to be a very, very controversial one. I can already feel the steam for Spirit when I get to talking to her. And it's not going to be in the way you think it is going to be. People are probably thinking that I'm going to put Spirit lower than an S tier, but you'll see what I mean when I start talking about Spirit. Spirit is much like Hag in a sense that because of the guidelines for my tier list, because Spirit is a pretty easy killer to learn, a lot of even spirits who don't really know how to use her power effectively in a way like, using her power to grab people off of gens or find survivors who are in grunts of pain, even spirits that don't really know how to use that can still do pretty decently. Like bad spirits. And then mediocre spirits who know like how to just stand still and they instantly are effective in chase, or they just know how to use her phase walk decent enough to jump out and get the hit. And then there's obviously the top tier spirits, and that's not really what we're looking for. But we're looking at the median amount of spirits. And it's much like Hag, where if you know the basic tricks that are very, very effective in your gameplay, you're going to be very, very successful with Spirit. And the thing about Spirit that's really, really funny is she can have ridiculous, easy to learn tricks that are so impactful in her gameplay. Literally standing still during a chase makes Spirit even more effective, and it will catch survivors off guard a lot. And even spirits who are a little bit above average and have decent perks such as Strider and stuff like that can hear those grunts of pain, and maybe they're not intending to go after a survivor, but they hear them, they go around a corner and they attack them, and they didn't even have to start a chase to begin with because they found that survivor because of that. So with decent perks and decent add-ons, you do not by any means need hardcore add-ons, but they definitely make an impact. I mean, some of her add-ons are just absolutely insane. But even the Brown add-ons are really, really good on Spirit. Her chase is very, very good. Her mobility is pretty good. Arguably better than Nurse. Even with Nurse with her top tier add-ons, and taking in Spirit's top tier add-ons, I think Spirit could have the advantage over mobility at sometimes. I think it's the increase in speed and duration that gives Spirit the advantage, but the increase in recharge rate that gives Nurse the advantage. So you really have to test that out in a server to know whose mobility is better at the absolute best that you can make it. But I think overall, usually Spirit has a easier time getting around the map because good nurses will know how to use her mobility to the fullest potential, especially on that second blink. They know how to make that second blink a little bit longer than most regular nurse players can use it for. But with Spirit, you just use her power. And I know a lot of people complain, well, the power takes 10 to 15 seconds to come back. Well, if you're using that power to get to a gen, think about it this way. You're not going to be wanting to use that power again until you are really into the chase and you know it's time to use that power. And by then, your power is going to be procced back up. And this is why, and I'll explain in a minute, Spirit, in my opinion, is the best killer in the game. Because based off of my guidelines, Spirit has less counterplay than Nurse does. And I was talking to some people through chats where they were talking about Nurse versus Spirit and stuff like that. And a lot of people were like, well, just because a killer is easier to play does not mean that they are better. I think that's untrue, and people were making up excuses to say that Nurse was better by saying that, well, Dead Hard and all these other things that you're talking about are essentially a counterplay to every killer. And what is your excuse to take that away from Nurse as a counterplay? Because Dead Hard can be very, very annoying against a Nurse, even more annoying than against a Ghostface, because I'll just use Ghostface for example, because unlike Nurse, right, Ghostface can be in the very, very close to a survivor, they wait out the Dead Hard, they waste a few seconds, like maybe 2 extra seconds, and then they down them. With a Nurse though, you could be going mid-blink, the person Dead Hards, then you lose your power for a little bit, they gain a lot of distance. And don't tell me that is, don't make up the excuse, well, that's a counterplay to everybody. no, it's very much more of a counterplay to Nurse than it is to some of the average killers, except if you're talking about and not gaining distance, but maybe they dead hard to a pallet or something like that, which is probably the most uncommon way that dead hard works. But the reason why I think Spirit is better is because there is a lot less counterplay. She's a lot easier to learn. So there is not much of a difference between a top tier Spirit and a mediocre Spirit. Once you start learning how to really pay attention to sound cues and use your power decently effectively, there's not going to be very much of a difference between a top tier Spirit and a top tier or a mediocre Spirit, besides probably more snowball and gen grabbing. Maybe that's it. And gen grabbing is a lot easier with Spirit than it is on Nurse. And the nice thing about Spirit is that she also has a little bit of stealth tied into it. Besides, the only exception to this is that they do get that little bit of sound cue, but they truly don't really know where you are at all the time. And some people, they might hear the power and they just kind of doubt that Spirit's really passing by, and then you end up getting them with that element of surprise or whatever. So getting that first initial hit is actually kind of easier with Spirit. And also, she has the decreased tear radius and decreased movement speed, but that doesn't really do anything to her. So I just think, honestly, I'm not going to say Spirit is way, way better than Nurse, but I think there are things that make Spirit better than Nurse, in my opinion. I'm not saying that Nurse is a terrible killer and Spirit is superior. She needs a new tier or whatever. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that across the board, Spirits, I think in general, have an easier game and they play better than Nurses because there's less counterplay, because it is easier to master Spirit's power, and in doing that, you can so easily, repeatedly use the same tricks that are so easy to learn to effectively win in a game. And that's why I think Spirit is better than Nurse. Enough said there. It's going to be pretty controversial, okay? I know some true DBD gamers are going to be in the comments and they're going to be talking about it. And that's fine. You can say whatever you want. I'm not going to get mad. I might. I might get mad. I'm not going to say I'm not going to get mad, because honestly I might. But anyways, who do we have next? I think we got Legion. Okay, Legion is next. Legion is another killer where I used to underestimate his power. Not overestimate, but underestimate. So if you asked me a while ago, this is actually the opposite to what I might have said with like someone like Myers or something like, or Doctor or something like that. I probably would have put up Legion in the D tier or something like that. But Legion is not given a lot of credit where credit is due for his power. Legion, his mobility is not really where he shines the most. It's kind of like with Clown. Like, to get the mobility that you want, you have to sacrifice a lot of your power. So you can use your mobility here and there, but you're not going to really use it for the majority of your match. It can be very beneficial, don't get me wrong, but his mobility isn't really what we use his power for, and it can only really come into play every so now and then. But he doesn't really need very, very good mobility because his game slowdown is incredible. And you don't even have to run ridiculous perks. You can run the basic meta like Pop Goes the Weasel Corrupt or Thanatophobia, and run decent add-ons. You could run like add-ons that slightly increase his power duration, or increase the amount of time it takes to mend, and you're going to do pretty well with Legion. He's not top tier because there are definitely some weaknesses to Legion and some counterplay to Legion. So I think that Legion does need maybe like a slight little buff to help benefit him. I'm not really sure at the moment what he would need for that. But his game slowdown can be pretty insane, and for the most part, a lot of survivors don't really know how to counterplay his game slowdown. A lot of mediocre survivors are so concerned about healing and stuff like that, and that's the nice thing about Legion, is it's kind of like a win-win scenario with him. You heal, you waste more time. You don't heal, he's always going to have that first hit for him. So he's one of those killers that is very easy at getting the first hit. And even if you're strategy all the time isn't to go around chaining hits with his power or whatever. Even if you just see one survivor, you can start that chase with a survivor by catching up to him with your power, getting the first hit, closing your power. They won't get a whole bunch of distance, and then you can get that second down, and his chase is honestly a little bit better than normal, given that he is very, very good at getting that first initial hit, and his game slow down make him a pretty decent killer. So I don't think I'm going to put him in the B tier, but I think I'm going to put him at the top of the C tier. This is definitely debatable, because Legion by no means is a very, very horrible killer, but he's not top tier in any way either. I think some of his weaknesses outweigh his benefits, despite counterplay, because like I said, not a lot of survivors know how to counterplay Legion, but that's not really where the disparity comes in. It's more of his weaknesses outweigh his benefits. So after Legion, Spirit Legion, Plague. Okay, Plague. Plague is very similar to Legion and Stealth Killers, who are very, very good at getting that first initial hit, but in kind of a different way, because you obviously have to puke on the survivors, and it's also kind of reliant on them not really willing to cleanse. And Plague has that advantage, much like Legion, where it's kind of that win-win scenario. You either don't cleanse and you stay injured for the rest of the game, you make the chases a little bit easier for Plague, in a sense that she only has to get one hit. And if she's running slowdown perks, I don't think, not a lot of people run slowdown perks on Plague anyway, but if she's running slowdown perks, that can definitely help. I know when I play Plague, I run slowdown perks because I know a lot of survivors do not like to cleanse. It's kind of like 50-50 with the amount of survivors who really, really like to cleanse all the time, and then survivors who just don't like cleansing at all, or you know, a little bit of mix of survivors who sometimes cleanse, sometimes don't. It's just kind of a very, very even distributed bag of stuff. But either way, I think for the majority of the games against average survivors, obviously top tier survivors, a lot of them aren't going to cleanse, but that doesn't matter because you start with one corrupt pool anyway. And if you can capitalize on using that power very, very well, the average Plague can do pretty well. If you run perks that help you find multiple survivors at once, you're going to have a very, very great time being able to down several survivors with your incredible, incredible Corrupt Purge that can significantly help you with chase and affect many survivors at once because you're quick at getting one survivor down, you find another survivor, it's snowball potential, obviously. So Plague is definitely B tier. I think I was going to say something else, but I can't exactly remember. And I think Plague is above Myers because Myers has weaknesses that Plague makes up for. She's one of those killers that obviously has a temporary snowball time, and Plague has an easier time getting that snowball time in the first place. And I think it's a better power overall. Because she has more than just that 60 seconds of exposed status effect, like Myers does. She also has other effects, like she basically completely counters medkits. Like even if the survivors like to cleanse a lot, you are constantly going to be getting infected, and medkits are just not gonna matter at all. And medkits are very, very commonly used. You get them pretty much every match, and they are one of the most effective survivor items. So the great thing about Plague, kind of a side effect, is that she has a counterplay, a huge counterplay to medkits, and she has a little bit of tracking too. Not a lot of people mention this, but when you see a survivor cleanse and you don't really know where to go at the moment, and you see that they cleanse at this pool, you can go over there and you can stop them. So Plague is definitely B tier, above Myers. Would I say she's above Doctor? It's kind of debatable where they go. It's kind of just like either or, could be could be above each other. I can't really work that out at the moment, but Plague definitely deserves a spot in the B tier. So, let's get on to the next killer, which is Ghostface. Ghostface. Where do I even begin with Ghostface? Ghostface is a tough killer to talk about for me because, I don't know. There's somehow a lot of weaknesses to him, but his power somehow gets past those weaknesses really well while being a very simple power. Obviously, Ghostface has no mobility whatsoever. But the nice thing about that makes up for that is that he just has passive stealth all the time. You literally just tap your power and boom, you have stealth. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, you know, that horrible recharge rate, you know, it just takes so long. I hate people who complain about that because I don't know about you, but 30 seconds isn't that long to me. And you run basic add-ons and it's not gonna feel like that much. You run like a brown recharge rate add-on or a yellow recharge rate. You don't even have to run the chewed pen and then run something else. And it's not gonna feel that bad. So I hate people who complain about his recharge rate all the time. I honestly don't think it's that bad. And having that passive stealth creates a similar effect that like Wraith and what is the other killer? Spirit. Any other stealth killer, a person that has like a stealth ability, it helps with getting that first initial hit. And the nice thing about Ghostface as well is that he can pressure multiple survivors, and not in the way that other killers do it, but let's say there's 2 survivors, 3 survivors on a gen. You are stalking at least 2 of them, and you keep 199, you ignore them for a little bit, you proc the exposed effect on one of them, down them, you come back to that other one later, and you down them easily, and it just helps him get those hooks, obviously, a lot quicker, which can make his game go by smoother so that the gens don't go by faster. So he's definitely good at pressuring multiple survivors, and the nice thing about it is that there's literally nothing they can do, and they're not always aware of it. When you stalk 2 survivors at once, the other survivor isn't fully aware of how much their stock is, so there's kind of that surprise element there, and if you're in your stealth mode, it's very easy to obviously look at them for a second, get their exposed, and by the time that they realize that they're exposed, they're scared, and they run away, you're already going to be on their butt, you're going to get them down. So the nice benefit to that is that there's literally nothing they can do besides try to force you to hit them, but that's pretty difficult. So it's kind of like, you know, with save the best for last. When someone realizes that you have saved the best for last, it's pretty difficult to try to force a hit unless you're in a situation where, I don't know, somebody just got off of the hook and you're really trying to get to that person, but they just keep body blocking and there's nothing you can really do. So, but most survivors won't do that anyway, the average amount of survivors. And I think Ghostface stealth is almost better than Wraith in some ways because he can hide behind walls and stalk the survivors, and even if they're paying attention really well, it's not that easy to figure out exactly where Ghostface is all the time. So that being said, I think Ghostface definitely deserves a soft spot in the B tier, below Myers, because I think Myers has a better time being able to snowball and pressure many survivors at once. I apologize for that. I hope I don't forget to cut that out, but there was a bit of a distraction. So anyway, yeah, I think he's gonna go, should go below Myers. And I think I forgot to mention, like, Myers' stealth potential throughout the game, like having that really small tear radius. But I think Ghostface outbeats him on that. So I think Ghostface goes above Myers, because I think the weaknesses that they both have, I think Ghostface weaknesses aren't as bad as Myers. This could be debatable. It's much like the Doctor's Plague situation. It's pretty debatable, you know. either or, but they're all pretty much at the same level. All the killers in the B tier are pretty much at the same level, so not much to fight over there. So anyways, we got Demogorgon next, and this is assuming that the buff has happened. And Demogorgon, I'm not sure how more lively he's gonna feel after the buff. Personally, after looking at the patch notes, I don't think the buff was all too great. And I think people really underestimated Demogorgon. I don't think the buff was needed personally. I think people were just really complaining about Demogorgon for no reason. I think Demogorgon had a similar situation to Freddy. Funny enough, because one's getting nerfed, one's getting buffed, where like one of them was having a low success rate in the statistics, and one of them was having a really high success rate, and nobody really looked into that as to why. And yeah, I don't really know why they had to buff Demogorgon. I think he was doing just fine. I think he was a great killer before the buff, but obviously after the buff, his power is going to be even more better because they significantly buffed his portal power while also decreasing the add-ons. So they basically did similar thing to Wraith, where his add-ons aren't as significant, but his base kit is better, so he becomes less add-on dependent or whatever. His chase, though, Demogorgon's chase is really, really good with the shred ability. That's going to be your main component. A lot of people think that the portals are going to be the main component into Demogorgon's gameplay. Not true. The majority of Demogorgons, the thing that they're going to be using the most is definitely their shred ability, which can end chases pretty quickly, and a fair amount of Demogorgons know how to use the shred ability effectively and know how to use little tricks that you can do with the ability to end chases fairly quickly. So Demogorgon's chase potential is pretty good. His mobility with the portals is not top tier. It's not like where like Hillbilly is, but it's definitely still pretty good. Given that you've been to this side of the map once, you can get to the other side of the map in a matter of seconds, and with the buff, it's going to be even faster, so that'll be really, really nice. And he does have a little bit of stealth. The stealth isn't really good, though. I wish they would get rid of the sound cues when they were doing the buff, because that would really, really help with the stealth potential. But they did increase the undetectable timer, so I guess it's not that easy to hear him when he comes out of the portal, given a certain amount of distance. Like, you put his portal a fair distance away from generator or whatever, they're not really going to know that you're coming there. And I don't think Demogorgon is really that add-on dependent. I know a lot of people run like Rat Liver or Rat Tail and stuff like that, and they're like, oh my god, it makes his power feel so much better. No. It obviously it makes some kind of impact, right? But I don't think that it's the most needed thing, and I don't think you need to use it every match. So yeah, like I said, his chase potential is pretty good. His mobility is pretty solid, and he does have a little bit of tracking with the whole portal thing, where you can open up your power and see if a survivor is near a portal. That isn't really useful unless you have a survivor near a generator, because if a survivor is about ready to seal your portal, it's not really the most important thing to waste your time, go over there and try to stop them, unless, I don't know, you just hooked a survivor and you know that the other survivors are eventually going to have to come over to unhook her. It doesn't really work in a lot of situations. Just run a few tracking perks, slow down perks, whatever, and you're going to do just fine with Demogorgon. So I don't really know why people are saying that Demogorgon was in very, very much need of a buff or whatever. Demogorgon is a very, very good killer in my opinion, and I think he's definitely above, Doctor. And yeah, I'm not gonna put him any further. I think that's a good spot, but don't take this personally. When you see this one, like, especially with the Spirit and Nurse situation, when you see me put a Spirit above Nurse, it's nothing personal. It's not saying that they're are massively better killer than them. This isn't a worst to best. If this was a worst to best, it'd be a completely different story. This is just a tier list. This is categorizing killers into a spot where I think it's needed. So, I am back from the second break, and I guess initially, looking at this, I kind of would like to make a few tweaks before we continue moving on, especially with the B tier. So let's take a look at this here. I'm at the same time of this, I'm also paying attention to the C tier as well. I think it's fine for right now. You guys can tell me in the comments what you think. I guess it's not a worst to best, so it doesn't really matter the order too much. I guess I shouldn't really complain too much about that. Okay, so after Demogorgon, who do we got here? Alright, we got Oni. Now, Oni is a very, very good killer, looking into it. And if you asked me, this, I say this every time I do a new killer, because, man, it's just incredible, the amount of views that have changed about Dead by Daylight killers since many, many months ago. Like I said, if you asked me months ago where to put Oni, I'd probably put him in the A tier somewhere. But just going right off the bat, I'm gonna put Oni in the S tier, above Hag. And the thing about Oni that I think puts him above Hag is that the counterplay, I think, is a bit more difficult than what Hag's is for the average player. Like with Hag, there are quite a few survivors that can incorporate that strategy a bit easier than what they can do with Oni. And really the only thing that you can do with Oni is try not to get hit for the longest amount of time possible. And if the killer's very, very good in chase, then there's not much you can do with this. And the average survivor is obviously not going to be the best in chase to the point where they're going to completely avoid a hit throughout the entire game. If this is really, really good survivors, then yes, they could definitely... that could definitely change the trajectory of this, but this is the average survivor. No. Across the board, Oni is going to get his power at some point, just like with Myers. There's just really no way that you can avoid getting out of somebody's line of sight. It's going to happen, it's inevitable, and that's the same case with Oni. So, his early game does kind of suck. I think, you know, Oni is, it's really another crisscross that you could do. It could really be Hag over Oni or Oni over Hag. It could be really either way, because both of their early games are a little bit slow, because they both have to set up obviously Hag has to set up her traps. She has a little bit of time investment to do before she starts really snowballing the game, and that's the same thing with Oni. He does have to get a few hits before he gets his power, but it's not really that much. I don't think there's really any add-ons that affect this, but he doesn't need add-ons that affect it. It's pretty quick. You get about 2-3 hits, and that's pretty easy to do, and you get your power. And even then, if you don't get those 2 to 3 hits, somebody's going to drop blood around, or blood orbs around, so you're gonna get it anyway. But with decent add-ons and decent perks, Oni can play very, very well, especially with like Tinkerer, or slowdown perks are really, really good on Oni. Keeping survivors injured with Oni is really, really good. And Oni's mobility is absolutely insane when he's in his power. Debatably better than Hillbilly's in many ways. And his chase is definitely better than Hillbilly's when he's in that power. Now, obviously, he can't use the power all the time, but when he can, it is 100%, about two times better than what Hillbilly can pull off in his chase. I mean, he can just curve around corners like it's nobody's business. That flick that he can do is just insane, and there's nothing really survivors can do about it. Juking his power is just really, really, really difficult for most survivors. And it's when he's in his power, it's very, very easy to get several downs. And even if, right, you start your power and there's nobody around you, the nice thing about his power is you can just easily cruise around the map and check for gens. It's really easy to monitor for gens when you get that power. And you get your power quite often. As soon as you get those first few initial hits, you're going to be getting your power constantly. The blood orbs are going to be everywhere. And if you run some perks that can help with keeping survivors injured, like maybe like Sloppy Butcher and stuff like that, you don't need to make a whole build out of it, like no power Oni, like, you know, how Monto does with that and stuff like that. You don't need to do a whole build with that. Just run a few slowdown perks and perks that can help keep people injured, and maybe like a tracking perk thrown in there, and you're going to do really, really well. And even without add-ons, he can still do really, really well. His power is not incredibly difficult to learn. Learning how to curve around corners quickly and be good in chase with Oni while you're in your power is not really that hard. The only thing that really holds back Oni is, a similar situation to Myers. Is that he's not always going to have his power, but he's going to get it frequently enough to create a humongous snowball effect. And really, really good Onis are truly very, 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 very scary. So, I think Oni definitely deserves a spot in the S tier. I feel like I was going to say something, but I forgot to say it. Something always crosses my mind, and I end up forgetting to say it, but... Oni does also have a little bit of utility that he has. Is he does have a little bit of tracking with the blood orbs and whatnot, so it could help with his chase a little bit. It's just a little thing that I wanted to add in there. It doesn't really make a huge impact on his game, but he definitely does have tracking. If you're walking up to a generator and you just see a pile of orbs, it's a good chance that a survivor is probably hiding around the corner somewhere, and that can benefit for your game, and you don't always need to run a whole bunch of tracking perks with Oni because you basically have built-in tracking. So, yeah, that's enough said for Oni. Next up is Deathslinger. I think this is one of the very few killers that I used to think that people underestimated him. Now I'm thinking that people just kind of overestimate Deathslinger. Don't get me wrong, there are good Deathslingers out there. But for the majority of Deathslingers, he suffers a similar problem to what Trapper, Trapper has. Whereas, he has a difficult time being able to use his power a lot to make an impact, on the game. For a majority of Deathslingers, you might use your power a few times at a loop, in the game, but I just feel like for the majority of my games that I play with Deathslinger, and I'm by no means a really, really good Deathslinger, I can get pretty good shots, but I'm busting shots every 10 seconds during chase. No, I'm nothing like that. So for the average Deathslinger, he suffers a similar problem to Trapper, where your power really isn't that incorporated into the game that much, and I think that's because his power is one of those powers where it really only has one effect, and I don't know how to explain it. It's one of those powers that is not like a per se like Spirit's power, where it just passively comes back, or it can do many other things than just one effect. That's what I'm trying to say, is that his power really only benefits in one way. Now, I'm not saying his power is bad in any way, because his power can definitely help in chase. And Deathslinger, any just decent Deathslinger who's good at, I'm telling you, I don't know how, but a lot of beginners, killers, when they start off their game, they definitely catch on to knowing how to use Deathslinger's power effectively, and they realize that holding the the aim option is definitely not what you want to do. You kind of want to get a quick scope. You want to get in a good line of sight so that you can fire it off really quickly and there's nothing they can really do. So he's definitely scary in chase. Survivors are always frequently going to have to be scared in chase because just his power alone can make survivors scared in chase. And once he gets in that perfect line of sight, even if the survivors try to, move side to side or whatever, it's only going to make the killer get to them faster. And I should also mention this. His stealth is actually pretty decent. And if you run good perks, like especially Monitor, Abuse, Save the Best for Last, your chase is going to be incredible. And your first initial hit is actually going to be pretty good. Because with a 16-meter tear radius with Monitor, and Abuse, there's not going to be enough time for them to react to get that first initial hit. So actually, he has an advantage in some ways, similar to like Legion or Wraith, where his first initial hit is actually pretty easy. And since his chase is pretty good in general, he can get that second hit pretty fast. I think the only thing that really holds Deathslinger back is probably just, for a majority of Deathslingers, your power itself, despite it like helping in chase passively sometimes, is not going to be frequently used enough to create a snowball effect across many different survivors. It can definitely affect one survivor pretty well, but it's just not going to be used enough to make a huge snowball effect. Now, I've seen some pretty good Deathslingers, don't get me wrong, but it's nothing like compared to Huntress. I think Huntress and Deathslinger are definitely comparable, because both of their powers are realistic powers, obviously. So he has to reload every time he uses his gun, and it's the same thing with Huntress. She has to reload her power. It doesn't passively just come back, right? Same thing with Trapper. But the difference between Deathslinger and Huntress is it's easier for Huntress to get a hit on somebody, find another survivor, get on them, find another survivor, hit them, and just with decent add-ons. Like you can run like Oakheft or something like that, and your cooldown is just going to be really fast. And that's something I forgot to mention about Huntress, is that your basic attacks are basically obsolete if you know what you're doing. You throw on like a Oakheft or the Brown Haft add-on. I forgot what it was called. But you throw on any of the stick add-ons, and you have that reduced cooldown. It's gonna make it a lot easier the survivors won't be able to gain as much distance with your power because you have such a small cooldown. And I should say, it's not. I shouldn't put Deathslinger down for this, because if you run Save the Best for Last, it definitely makes it a lot better. Survivors won't be able to get much distance, and even if they get distance, you obviously have your power to help with that. So the only thing that the 4.4 movement speed holds him back for is just his mobility, like when he's not chasing the survivor. But it doesn't really affect anything in a regular chase. Now, I wish I could talk about, his ability to get through those tight holes while he's in a chase, but not a lot of Deathslingers are that skilled at getting it. And even if they are, even if, a Deathslinger knows how to do that, it might happen once or twice in a game. It's not going to happen a whole bunch. But when it does happen, it can make an impact, don't get me wrong. But I should say that an average Deathslinger can get a shot through tight corners and know how to just enough get that hit by kind of conservating the chain to be able to get that hit in spots that you don't think you would get them. So yeah, I think that's all there really is to talk about Deathslinger. That was quite a lot for Deathslinger. Definitely one of the more interesting killers to talk about when ranking him, because this is another one of those killers where it could be a lot of ways. You know what I mean? So he's not going in the C tier. Definitely not going in the C tier. But I think I'm going to put Deathslinger. Should I put him above Doctor? Let's put him below Plague, but above Ghostface. I think think that seems about right. But, you know, don't take this personally. You know, it's not a worst to best ranking, so that doesn't mean that Deathslinger is step above Ghostface. Just Ghostface. It just means he's a little bit better, in my opinion. So, after Deathslinger, we have Pyramid Head. Oh boy, Pyramid Head. I've always thought about maining Pyramid Head, because I just thought he was a really cool killer. His power is just really fun to use, but that's going off topic. Pyramid Head. Man, when this killer got released, and I know this is going off topic as well, the excitement of seeing that shockwave power was just so fascinating. Like, nothing will ever beat seeing a killer on release date, especially licensed killers. Man, that I just love envisioning, you know, when Pyramid Head was on the PTB. It was just really, really cool and kind of funky too. I thought it was always kind of weird seeing a killer with a big Pyramid Head in the game, in the DBD game. I always thought it looked a bit kooky, if that's the word. But anyways, let's talk about Pyramid Head in general. His chase is very, very, very good. His shockwave power, and this is similar to Deathslinger in a way. A lot of beginner players and mediocre players catch on to being able to use his power very, very effectively somehow. I don't know how, but I don't know what it is. It's just his power is not... You think it's really hard to master, but once you start playing like 5 or 6 games of Pyramid Head, you really start to get the feel for using that shockwave power and knowing and predicting where survivors are going to go pretty well. And you don't have to make the most precise decision. It's just kind of a little educated guess, and 95% of the time, you get it right. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. More like 60-70% of the time, you get it right. Sometimes, once in a blue moon, you'll get it wrong. The nice thing about Pyramid Head above Deathslinger, though, is that his power is definitely incorporated a lot more than Deathslinger, because it doesn't require him to reload. Everything is passive, and the only weakness similar to Deathslinger from Pyramid Head is that the only thing holding back Pyramid really is just his mobility. That's it. Other than that, his chase is very, very good. He definitely does have snowball potential. You know, he can get a shockwave hit from a survivor. Another survivor's close, he can hit them. He can go to another survivor, shockwave them. There's just a lot of snowball potential. Especially if you're using aura reading or tracking perks on this killer, he can be absolutely insane. And you don't have to run like a whole bunch of them. You don't have to run Nurse's Calling, I'm All Ears. You don't have to run a whole set. You could literally run like one aura reading perk, and it will impact your game extremely well. Like, you could just run Nurse's Calling and then a bunch of other perks, or you could just run I'm All Ears and a few other perks. I would suggest slowdown perks on this killer to accommodate for his not so good mobility, so he can't really control gens the absolute best. But the nice thing is, though, even though he can't control gens, I think a big thing that a lot of people forget about Pyramid Head is his other piece of his power, which is his Trail of Torment, obviously, which can save a lot of time. And it's very, very hard to avoid the Torment. If you know what you're doing, you put the Torment around corners, or even if you just use them in a loop. Most survivors at some point are just gonna have to bite their tongue and go through the Torment, and there's really nothing they can do. And when you cage a survivor, it saves a lot of time. Same with just mooring the survivor, the Final Judgment. It's just really, really quick and easy, and it can save a lot of time. It definitely accommodates for his not so great gen control and mobility, because mobility obviously helps with gen control because you can get those gens faster. But I would still suggest something like maybe not like Pop Goes the Weasel, but maybe like Ruin Undying for like passive aggression or Surge or something like that, because obviously you're going to cage survivors, so Pop won't always work, and stuff like Barbecue and Chili too. So like you could replace Barbecue and Chili with like Nurse's Calling or I'm All Ears, replace Pop with like Ruin Undying, and then run one other perk. Save the Best for Last isn't bad on Pyramid Head, to be honest. So yeah, Pyramid Head is definitely A tier, and I think he's above Hillbilly, and I don't think that's definitely not in, should I call it an understatement? Yeah, that's definitely not an understatement. I'm trying to use big boy words here, but I'm questioning if I'm even using them correctly. But Pyramid Head, I think he goes above Hillbilly. Despite Hillbilly's good mobility, I think Pyramid Head just has a better time in chase. Hillbilly has a slightly difficult time in chase. It's gonna take a few chainsaws before you get the down, and sometimes you might just have to bite your tongue and hit him with the mallet. Whereas Pyramid Head, he just gets many opportunities without much drawback to it. So Pyramid Head is going in the A tier, not the S tier, but A tier is a good spot for him. Next up is Blight. Oh boy, Blight. When I saw Blight on release, I'll be honest, I did not think he was going to be a very good killer. I thought he was going to be a very wacky, weird killer that they came up with a stupid idea for, and I thought it was, on release, he was just a really wacky killer, to put it honestly and bluntly. I was not used to him for the first few weeks. I just thought it was always weird. But now, there are some very good Blights out there. And I think Blight probably has the best mobility in the game. Above Oni and above Hillbilly. He has basically no charge time. His power replenishes constantly. This is probably the least add-on dependent killer in the game. You do not by any means need add-ons for Blight. Maybe to get a little bit more speed while you're doing your rush, or to get that turn rate. Other than that, he's not that add-on dependent. Perk-wise, perks can definitely help. I wouldn't suggest you just go perkless on this killer, but you probably could, and you could probably have a successful game. But his mobility is probably the best in the game. His power recharges very fastly. There's no charge time to his power, so he can just, bam, proc his power, and he's off at a very high speed. I guess the only, I didn't mention this with a whole lot of killers, especially with like Huntress and many killers. He is somewhat map dependent. Like on indoor maps, his mobility is a bit hindered because you have those tight corners and you can't just constantly go in a straight line. You're always going to have like a wall that's going to kind of be in the way. It's the same thing with like Huntress. You can't really get those cross map snipes, but not every Huntress can get a cross map snipe anyway, so it's not really that bad. Indoor maps don't really make it that bad for Blight. In fact, he's not that bad on like Midwich because you have those long open hallways, which are very beneficial for Blight. But his mobility is very good. His chase is pretty good. Now it might just be because I'm not that experienced with Blight, and when I watch other Blight players, they definitely do get the use out of his other ability, which is the lethal attack. But when I'm using Blight, I only get a few hits with the lethal rush per game. But even if the lethal rush, you're not like directly getting hits with it, you're still catching up with the survivor pretty quickly mid-chase. Like if a survivor drops a pallet and they start running away, Blight can recover from that pretty quickly. He can. This is very similar to Bubba in a way. He's very good at shredding pallets quickly and getting back into the chase pretty quickly without the survivors gaining much distance. Let's say a survivor drops a pallet. He can easily slam into a wall, break the pallet, recover quickly, and then use his power again to catch up with them, possibly get the lethal rush. But even if he doesn't, he's right on the survivor's butt, and it makes the chase a lot better. But I will say that his power isn't never used in the gameplay. I'm just not the best with Blight when it comes to using his lethal rush for attacks. But I can definitely tell for the majority of Blights they can use that lethal rush pretty effectively. And with good perks, especially like Tinker is a very good perk on Blight. Blight is just absolutely insane. So Blight is going at the top of the A tier. I would put him in S tier, but it feels a bit weird putting him in S tier for some reason. I've seen other people put him in S tier, but if I'm not going to put him in S tier, I'm going to put him at the top of A tier at least. So let's move on to the next killer, which is the Twins. And the Twins is very similar to Hillbilly in terms of the amount of people who play. I have not seen a whole lot of Twins play since release. Obviously, there was quite a bit of Twins in the initial release for about a week, and then Twins just disappeared after that, really, which was kind of sad. But Twins is another underestimated killer, I have to say. Twins mobility is pretty good for the most part. Her power recharges pretty quickly. I wouldn't really suggest using Victor all the time for mobility, but when you can, it's definitely useful. Because the only time you guaranteed want to use Victor is when you see a lot of survivors injured. If you're just using his power right off the bat, like you open up the match and boom, you proc out Victor, that isn't really the best idea. You kind of want to move around a little bit, check for gens. Once you see a survivor, get that hit, then plop out Victor and down that survivor. And eventually you'll just get more and more injured survivors because survivors aren't always going to heal. And that's when the snowball kicks in. Victor literally becomes more powerful when you have a lot of injured survivors. Now, they are going to nerf and buff the Twins a bit. For some reason, they increased the cooldown after downing a survivor from 3 to 5 seconds for this nerf, but they buffed a few of the add-ons that aren't really that important. There's some of the higher tier add-ons or add-ons that not a lot of people cared about. So the add-ons, she isn't very add-on dependent, and her add-ons aren't very great in the first place. The brown add-ons are decent, but they're not absolute game changers. The only one I can think of is probably like the wooden sword and stuff like that, but the rest of them aren't absolute game changers unless you want a little bit more movement speed or, you know, a little bit quicker time coming out of the power or whatever. But I don't think the nerf is going to do too much. It's just, man, they're going to get a lot of hate for that cooldown thing, but the snowball is actually pretty nice. I mean, Twins is probably the best killer for slugging in this game, and definitely benefits from having a lot of survivors injured. So if you run things like maybe like Sloppy Butcher or perks that like Thanatophobia to try to keep survivors injured, then your snowball potential is definitely a lot higher, because the more survivors injured, obviously the better Victor becomes. But obviously you have to capitalize on that pretty well. If a Twins player is having kind of a rough time just trying to down a survivor in the first place, especially at the early game, their Victor power isn't really going to become extremely useful. But the Victor isn't bad for getting the first initial hit. She definitely is a little bit better at getting the first initial hit than most other killers, and is pretty good at chase. And Victor isn't only just good for getting downs. He's also pretty good for getting the first initial hit, especially if you're having a little bit of trouble getting the first hit on survivor. You plop out Victor, you pounce him on him, and then you eventually catch up to him with Charlotte. They actually get slowed down when they're attempting to take off Victor, so they kind of lose distance, and this helps a lot of times in chase. I've noticed this. So yeah, her snowball potential and her slugging potential is what makes Twins very, very strong. You run some gen regression perks run some perks that will keep the survivors injured for longer, so that you can snowball really well. Not very add-on dependent, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. And you're going to be pretty successful with the twins. So the twins is not above Blight, but in between Blight and Pyramid Head, for sure. I've seen people put her in the S tier. Definitely has some weaknesses. I forgot to mention this. There is definitely some counterplay to twins. It's not that hard to juke Victor. An average survivor is pretty decent with juking Victor, but also you got to look at it this way. The average twins player is pretty good at being patient with Victor and being able to get the hit, so it's pretty 50-50 on missing the attack. And even then, if you miss the attack, they don't always get the kick in, and even when they get the kick in, most of the time Charlotte is pretty close, and they end up just screwing themselves over by kicking Victor because you're right on their butt and whatnot. And I also forgot to mention that another thing that helps with Chase is that if you're plopping out Victor and you leave twins by a pallet, a lot of twins players know how to do this. It's going to be very, very hard to loop that pallet. Even if you kick Victor, you're going to be on that pallet, obviously, and it's going to be blocked, and chances are they're going to be in a bad position, and you're going to be able to punish them for that. So the mobility is pretty good, above average. Chase is definitely really, really good. Snowball potential is pretty good. Obviously, snowball, slugging, they're kind of the in the same category there. But twins, not above Blight, because there is quite a bit of counterplay to twins that can push down her snowball potential. Like, the thing about Nurse is that, or Spirit, is that there's a lot less counterplay than there is to compared to twins. Twins can snowball, but the thing is, there's a lot of ways that you can stop that snowball. Alright, and then we got Trickster. Now, I think Trickster deserves another buff in the future, but right now Trickster is definitely a lot better than he was on release. I didn't even like calling him Trickster because it just makes no sense. I like calling him the Star or the Showstopper or whatever, but whatever, I'm going to continue saying Trickster because they've impeded it into my mind at this point, and I really, really hate it. But anyways, Trickster. Man, what do I have to say about Trickster? Oh boy, Trickster is... I don't want to say he's bad, and I haven't played enough Trickster to really know the full potential. Trickster, don't get me wrong, is really, really annoying and really good. Really annoying for survivors because he's pretty good in Chase. Now, there are some loops that Trickster has a pretty tough time with. Now, unlike Huntress, the thing about Huntress is that it's not that difficult, even on like tight loops where it's harder for Huntress to get that hatchet hit. It's still very, very possible to get that hatchet hit if you're quick enough and you know what you're doing. With Trickster, however, you have slowdown, and your power doesn't really help you all the time because obviously you have to get 8 dagger hits before they get injured. So he has a really, really good time at some loops, and then at other loops, he really, really sucks. But for the majority, he is at open loops where he benefits a lot in Chase. There's only a few loops that he struggles with. Surprisingly, those loops are the tight, short loops, like especially like the rock ones that spawn on a few maps. And his mobility, obviously, he has no mobility, which is something that puts him down quite a bit. So I'd say he's not add-on dependent, but he definitely needs good perks to succeed. And I don't want to put him in the C tier, but I'm gonna put him above Trapper in the D tier. There's not a lot to say about Trickster right now, but I think this is... Move down. I think this is a reasonable spot. Again, I think Trickster's will improve over time, and he might see a buff in the future that'll make him even better. He's definitely a lot better than on release. On release, he would have been an F tier, for sure. But he is better than Trapper. because his chase is definitely not risk like Trapper's is. So yeah, that is the tier list for you. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. This video is surprisingly easier to get out than you would probably expect because I don't really have to do a lot of cuts. I just kind of talk and blabble as much as I want. The only part that's going to take really long is the exporting. That's really it. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Now, before I end this video, I definitely want to talk about something. I was just on the Discord. Obviously, I've done this tier list at different parts of the day. So I was talking on Discord, and we were going through some video ideas. And one of the things that we were thinking about doing was some movie reviews. I did post a community post, so you can choose if you would like to see movie reviews or not. I think that would be really good for my channel, and I could definitely upload a whole lot of movie reviews for you guys and stuff like that throughout the week. No problem at all. But other than that, I will get to working on the stream comp as soon as possible. I keep pushing it aside because it's a mouthful because I don't really know where to begin on the stream comp, and there's just so much I can do. It's really exciting, but it's a mouthful, really. So, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Tell me what you think in the comment section. Like I said, a lot of these spots on the tier list are very, very much debatable, and I would like to hear your opinion in the comment section down below. I know there's going to be a lot of people who are not subscribed to the channel who are just looking for DBD killer tier lists, who are going to see this tier list, they're going to watch the whole dang thing, and they're going to be like, oh, well, you know, I would like to make a comment on that. I'd like to have a discussion with you about that. So please tell me your thoughts in the comment section down below. Join the Discord. The link will always be in the description of the video. And read the community post so that you can stay up to date on all of our future content. So other than that, like and subscribe, guys, and I'll see you next time.